William's hand trembled as he reached for the brass doorknob of his modest two-bedroom apartment. The familiar weight of his work bag hung heavy on his shoulder, and the autumn rain had soaked through his jacket during the walk from the bus stop. He had been looking forward to this moment all day, coming home to Kate after another exhausting shift at the electronics store where he worked as a sales associate. The fluorescent lights in the hallway buzzed overhead as he fumbled with his keys. Mrs. Henderson from apartment 3B had left her television volume too high again, and the muffled sound of a game show echoed through the thin walls. William had grown accustomed to these small annoyances over the 2 years he and Kate had lived in this building. It wasn't their dream home, but it was theirs, and that had always been enough. As the lock clicked open, William pushed the door inward and stepped across the threshold. The apartment was unusually quiet. Normally, Kate would have the radio playing softly in the kitchen while she prepared dinner, or she would call out a cheerful greeting from wherever she happened to be. Instead, an unsettling silence filled the space, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. William set his bag down beside the small table near the entrance and hung his wet jacket on the coat hook Kate had insisted they install when they first moved in. She had painted it bright yellow, claiming it would add a splash of sunshine to their otherwise plain white walls. The memory of that weekend project brought a small smile to his face, but it faded quickly as he noticed something was different about the apartment. The living room looked exactly as he had left it that morning. The navy blue couch positioned against the wall, the coffee table with its collection of Kate's magazines neatly stacked, and the small television they had bought second-hand from a neighbor. But there was an emptiness to the space that he couldn't quite identify. It felt hollow, as if the warmth that usually greeted him had been drained away. William called out Kate's name, his voice echoing slightly in the stillness. No response came back. He walked through the living room toward the kitchen, his footsteps muffled by the worn carpet they had been saving to replace. The kitchen was spotless, which struck him as odd because Kate usually left evidence of her afternoon activities. A coffee mug in the sink, crumbs on the counter from her lunch, or notes she had written to herself stuck to the refrigerator door. He opened the refrigerator and found it fully stocked, just as Kate always kept it. She took pride in ensuring they never ran out of essentials, and she had a talent for finding bargains at the grocery store that stretched their modest budget. Everything appeared normal, yet William couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Moving toward the bedroom, William noticed that the door was slightly ajar. This was unusual because Kate had a habit of keeping it closed during the day to maintain a clear separation between their sleeping space and living areas. She had read in one of her home magazines that this practice helped create better energy flow throughout the apartment. William pushed the bedroom door open wider and immediately saw Kate sitting on the edge of their bed. She was facing the window that looked out onto the small courtyard behind their building, where a few scraggly trees provided the only touch of nature visible from their apartment. Her shoulders were hunched forward, and her long brown hair fell like a curtain, obscuring her face from his view. She was wearing the light blue sweater he had given her for her birthday 6 months earlier. She had worn it frequently since then, claiming it was the softest thing she owned and that it reminded her of his thoughtfulness every time she put it on. But now, sitting there in the dim afternoon light filtering through their bedroom window, she looked smaller somehow, as if the sweater was swallowing her. William stood in the doorway for a moment, uncertain whether to speak or move closer. Something about Kate's posture told him that this was not an ordinary afternoon, and he found himself hesitating to break whatever spell of solitude she had wrapped around herself. He had learned over their 3 years together that Kate sometimes needed quiet moments to process her thoughts, especially after difficult days at her job at the local library where she worked as an assistant. But as his eyes adjusted to the softer light in the bedroom, William began to notice details that made his stomach tighten with worry. Kate's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. Her breathing seemed shallow and controlled, as if she was making a deliberate effort to keep it steady. Most concerning of all, he could see the slight shake of her shoulders that indicated she was crying, though she was doing it so quietly that no sound reached his ears. William had seen Kate cry before, but never like this. When she was sad or frustrated, she was usually vocal about it, willing to share her feelings and work through problems together. This silent weeping was something entirely different, something that suggested a deeper pain than he had ever witnessed in her. He took a careful step into the room, the floorboard creaking slightly under his weight. Kate didn't turn around or acknowledge his presence, which was unlike her. Normally, she would have heard him come home and would have greeted him with a smile and questions about his day. Her continued stillness filled William with a growing sense of dread. The afternoon light cast long shadows across their bedroom floor, and William realized that Kate might have been sitting there for hours. The thought of her suffering alone while he had been going through the motions of an ordinary workday made his chest ache. Whatever had happened, whatever had reduced his usually resilient girlfriend to this state of quiet despair, William knew that their lives were about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. He cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle her, and prepared to cross the invisible barrier that seemed to separate them in that moment. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, and William understood that the next word spoken would determine everything that followed. William moved slowly across the bedroom, each step deliberate and careful. The old wooden floor beneath their feet had its familiar creaks and groans, sounds that had become part of the soundtrack of their daily lives. But now those sounds seemed amplified in the heavy silence that surrounded Kate, like a protective shell she had built around herself. When he reached the bed, William sat down beside her, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel crowded but close enough that she could feel his presence. Up close, he could see the tear tracks on her cheeks, evidence of the crying that had been going on long before his arrival. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she stared straight ahead at the window as if watching something he couldn't see. Kate's breathing was still controlled, but William could see the effort it took for her to maintain that composure. Her hands remained clasped in her lap, and now he could see that she was holding something, a white envelope that had been crumpled and smoothed out multiple times. The paper looked official, with the kind of formal letterhead that usually meant important news. Though William couldn't make out the details from his angle, he reached over slowly and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. Kate didn't pull away, but she didn't lean into his touch either. She remained frozen in her position, as if moving might shatter whatever fragile control she had managed to maintain. William could feel the tension in her muscles, the way her body held itself rigid against the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Kate," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What happened?" For a long moment she didn't respond. William watched as she continued to stare out the window, where the late afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the small courtyard. A few leaves had fallen from the trees, scattered across the concrete like nature's confetti, but there was nothing celebratory about the scene. Finally, Kate's lips moved, though the words came out so quietly that William had to strain to hear them. "The letter came today," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "I've been sitting here since 2 o'clock trying to figure out what to do." William's mind raced through possibilities. Bills they couldn't pay, problems with her job, health issues, all the fears that kept him awake some nights when money was particularly tight, or when life felt especially uncertain. But something about Kate's demeanor suggested this was bigger than their usual worries. "What kind of letter?" he asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Kate's grip on the envelope tightened, and fresh tears began to flow down her cheeks. "It's from a lawyer," she said, her words coming in short, broken phrases. "In Oregon. About my father." William felt his stomach drop. Kate had never talked much about her father, and William had learned not to push the subject. All he knew was that her parents had divorced when she was 12, that her father had moved across the country, and that they hadn't spoken in over 8 years. Kate's mother had raised her alone, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, and the absence of Kate's father had always been a painful topic that she kept buried. "What does it say?" William asked, though he could already guess that whatever news the letter contained, it wasn't good. Kate finally turned to look at him, and the pain in her eyes was so raw that William felt his own chest tighten in response. Her face was streaked with tears, and her usually bright expression was replaced by something that looked like a combination of grief, anger, and confusion. "He's dead," she said, the words falling between them like stones dropped into still water. "He died 3 weeks ago and nobody told me until now. The lawyer found my address somehow and sent this letter because apparently there are things I need to know about." William reached for her hand, covering her clasped fingers with his palm. The envelope crackled slightly under the pressure, and he could feel how cold her hands had become from sitting there for hours. "Kate, I'm so sorry," he said, though he knew the words were inadequate for the complexity of what she must be feeling. "I don't know if I should be sad or angry or relieved," Kate continued, her voice growing stronger but more unsteady at the same time. "He walked out on us when I was just a kid. Mom struggled for years because of him. I used to lie awake at night wondering what I had done wrong, why he didn't love me enough to stay or even call." The bitterness in her voice was something William had never heard before. Kate was generally optimistic, someone who looked for the good in people and situations, but this revelation seemed to have tapped into a reservoir of pain that she had been carrying for years. "Then I got older and realized it wasn't about me," Kate went on. "It was about him and his inability to handle responsibility. So I stopped waiting for him to call or write or show up. I built a life without him, and it was a good life. We have a good life, William." She looked at him with desperate eyes, as if seeking confirmation that their modest apartment and simple routines were enough, that the family they had created together could fill the void left by absent fathers and broken promises. "We do have a good life," William agreed, squeezing her hand gently. "But that doesn't mean this isn't hard. You're allowed to feel whatever you're feeling about this." Kate nodded, but her expression suggested she was still struggling to identify exactly what those feelings were. "The lawyer wants me to call him. Apparently there are some decisions I need to make, some papers I need to sign. I'm his only child, so everything falls to me now." The weight of unexpected responsibility seemed to press down on her shoulders as she spoke. William could see her trying to process not just the emotional impact of her father's death, but also the practical implications of being thrust into a role she had never wanted or prepared for. "There's something else," Kate said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper again. "The lawyer mentioned that there might be some money involved. Not a lot, but some, and there's a house." William felt his eyebrows rise in surprise. He had always assumed that Kate's father had disappeared into poverty or addiction, the way absent fathers often did in the stories he had heard. The idea that there might be assets, property, or money involved added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. "A house?" he repeated. Kate nodded, fresh tears beginning to flow. "Somewhere in a small town outside Portland. The lawyer said it's been empty since he died, and I need to decide what to do with it. I need to either take responsibility for it or sign papers to have it sold." The implications hung in the air between them. This wasn't just about grief or closure or making peace with the past. This was about decisions that could change their future, opportunities they had never imagined, and responsibilities they weren't prepared to handle. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, with a thin mist that seemed to cling to everything in Millfield like a soft blanket. Kate had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a small town. The distant whistle of a freight train, the hum of early morning traffic, and the rhythmic dripping of rain from the eaves outside their window. After a quiet breakfast at Murphy's Diner, where the waitress seemed to know everyone except them, Kate and William walked the 6 blocks to Maple Street. Kate carried the house keys in her jacket pocket, and William held a small notebook where they had written down Mr. Chen's instructions and important phone numbers. The house at 847 Maple Street was exactly as it had appeared in the photographs. A modest bungalow, with white siding and dark green shutters, surrounded by a picket fence that had been painted recently enough to still look fresh. The yard was neat and well maintained, with fall flowers blooming in carefully tended beds along the front walkway. A large maple tree dominated the front yard, its leaves just beginning to turn the brilliant oranges and reds that would soon carpet the ground. Kate stopped at the front gate, her hand resting on the latch, and William could see her gathering courage for what lay ahead. The house looked welcoming, like a place where a family might live happily, which somehow made the situation more painful rather than less. It would have been easier, perhaps, if her father had lived in squalor or obvious loneliness. "It's beautiful," William said softly, trying to offer some comfort. "He took good care of it." Kate nodded, but didn't move to open the gate. "I keep thinking I might see him through one of the windows," she admitted. "Like he's going to come out and ask what we're doing here." The front door was painted the same dark green as the shutters, and it had a brass knocker shaped like a pineapple, a symbol of hospitality that seemed at odds with Kate's memories of her father as someone who had abandoned his family. She fumbled with the keys for a moment before finding the right one, and the lock turned easily under her hand. The interior of the house surprised them both with its warmth and cleanliness. The living room was painted in soft earth tones, with comfortable furniture arranged around a stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on automotive repair, local history, and classic literature. The hardwood floors gleamed with care, and everything was dust-free as if David had been expecting company. But what struck Kate most powerfully was the presence of photographs throughout the room. They covered the mantel above the fireplace, sat on side tables, and hung in frames along the walls. And nearly every photograph featured her at different stages of her life. Her high school graduation picture, which she didn't remember sending him, a newspaper clipping of her college graduation that someone must have mailed to him, and even more recent photographs that she realized must have come from her mother. "Kate," William said quietly, pointing to the mantelpiece. "Look at this." She followed his gaze to a prominent spot above the fireplace where a large framed photograph showed her at age 16, wearing her prom dress and standing next to her date in front of their old apartment building. Kate remembered her mother taking that picture, but she had no idea how her father had gotten a copy. Next to the prom photo was her senior portrait, the one her mother had ordered dozens of copies of to send to relatives. But the frame it sat in was obviously expensive, with detailed silver work that must have cost more than Kate earned in a week at the library. As they moved through the house, the evidence of David's attention to Kate's life became overwhelming. The kitchen refrigerator was covered with newspaper clippings about local events where Kate had been mentioned, her volunteer work at the literacy center, her participation in community theater, even a letter to the editor she had written about library funding that had been published 3 years earlier. In the hallway leading to the bedrooms, William found a small table covered with what appeared to be birthday cards and Christmas cards that had never been sent. They were arranged by year, going back almost to the time when David had left. Each card was addressed to Kate in her father's careful handwriting, but none bore postmarks. "He wrote to me," Kate whispered, picking up one of the cards. It was a birthday card for her 18th birthday, covered with her father's handwriting. The message inside was lengthy and heartfelt, apologizing for his absence, expressing pride in her accomplishments, and explaining that he stayed away because he believed she was better off without him. Kate sank into a chair in the hallway, reading card after card, each one revealing more of her father's thoughts and feelings over the years. He had written about wishing he could attend her graduation, about hoping she would find someone who would love her properly, about his regret over the mistakes he had made when she was young. "Why didn't he send them?" she asked William, her voice breaking. "Why did he write all of this but never let me know?" William had moved into what appeared to be David's bedroom, and found even more evidence of a man consumed by regret and love for his absent daughter. The dresser held a jewelry box that contained a pearl necklace with a note attached. For Kate's wedding day, whenever that comes. The closet contained wrapped presents with gift tags dated for birthdays and Christmases going back years. In the nightstand drawer, William discovered something that made his heart ache for both Kate and her father. It was a small calendar, the kind people use to track appointments, but instead of meetings or events, David had marked Kate's birthday every year with a star and the words "Kate turns age today." He had also marked her graduation dates, the day she started working at the library, and other milestones he had somehow learned about. "Kate, you need to see this," William called out, but when he returned to the hallway, he found her sitting on the floor surrounded by years of unsent correspondence, crying harder than he had ever seen her cry, the letters. 2 months later, Kate stood in the same doorway where William had found her crying that autumn afternoon. But everything had changed. The apartment looked different now. Boxes were stacked along the walls, and their few pieces of furniture were covered with sheets, waiting for the moving truck that would arrive in the morning. Kate had made the decision to keep her father's house in Millfield, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of selling the property and returning to their old life with the inheritance money, she and William had decided to move to Oregon and start over completely. The repair shop had been sold to David's longtime employee, a man named Frank who had worked alongside her father for 12 years and understood the business better than anyone. The decision hadn't been easy or immediate. After returning from Oregon the first time, Kate had spent weeks processing everything she had learned about her father. She had long conversations with her mother, finally confronting the secret correspondence that had kept David informed about her life while leaving Kate in the dark about his continued love and interest. Her mother's explanation had been complicated and painful to hear. She had maintained contact with David because she could see how much his absence was hurting Kate, and she had hoped that eventually he would find the courage to reach out directly. But as the years passed and David remained paralyzed by his own guilt and fear, her mother had continued sending updates because she believed it was better for him to know Kate was thriving than for him to disappear completely from their lives. I thought if he knew how well you were doing, how strong and independent you had become, he might finally believe he deserved to be part of your life again, her mother had explained through tears of her own. I never imagined he would die before finding the courage to contact you. The revelation had been devastating for Kate, but it had also provided a strange kind of closure. She realized that her father's absence hadn't been about lack of love, but about an abundance of love combined with crushing self-doubt and regret. David Morrison had been a young man who had made a terrible mistake in abandoning his family, and then had spent the rest of his life punishing himself for that mistake, while never believing he deserved forgiveness. William had been supportive through all of Kate's emotional processing, even when she had announced her desire to move to Millfield permanently. He had researched job opportunities in the area and discovered that the small town was only an hour away from Portland, where his computer programming skills might be more in demand. The inheritance money would allow him to take some classes and update his technical knowledge while they established themselves in their new location. But more than the practical considerations, William understood that Kate needed to live in the house where her father had loved her from afar for so many years. She needed to walk through those rooms every day, to sleep in the town where David had built a life while thinking about her constantly, to somehow bridge the gap between the father she had lost and the father she had never really known. The repair shop, money had been enough to pay off their debts and provide a comfortable financial cushion for the transition. Kate had found work at the Millfield Public Library, a tiny branch that served the surrounding rural communities. The position paid less than her job in the city, but the cost of living was lower, and for the first time in their relationship, money wasn't a constant source of stress and worry. On their last night in the old apartment, Kate and William sat on their couch, the same couch where Kate had processed the initial phone call with Mr. Chen, and reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed. The television played quietly in the background, but neither of them was really watching. "Do you ever regret it?" Kate asked. "Leaving everything behind to move somewhere we've never lived, for reasons that probably seem crazy to most people?" William reached over and took her hand, a gesture that had become automatic during their months of navigating this life change together. "I regret that your father didn't get to see how amazing you turned out," he said. "I regret that he spent 15 years loving you and thinking he couldn't tell you. But I don't regret anything we've decided to do." Kate leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his steady presence the way she had that first devastating afternoon. "I still get angry sometimes," she admitted. "At him for leaving, at my mother for keeping secrets, at myself for spending so many years hating someone who was just broken and scared." "That's normal," William said. "You don't have to stop being angry just because you understand his reasons now. He hurt you even if he didn't mean to. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't erase the pain they caused." They had learned this lesson through several difficult conversations with a counselor Kate had started seeing after their return from Oregon. Processing complicated grief, mourning, someone while simultaneously learning to love them, had required professional guidance and a lot of emotional work that was still ongoing. The counselor had helped Kate understand that she could hold multiple feelings about her father simultaneously. She could be angry about his abandonment, while also being touched by his hidden devotion. She could grieve for the relationship they never had, while also feeling grateful for the evidence that he had never stopped loving her. Human emotions, the counselor had explained, were complex enough to accommodate seemingly contradictory feelings without requiring Kate to choose one over the others. As they prepared for bed on their final night in the apartment, Kate took one last look around the rooms where she had received the news that changed everything. The kitchen where she had researched Millfield, the bedroom where William had found her crying, the living room where they had made the decision to move across the country together. "Thank you," she said to William as they turned off the lights, "for coming with me to Oregon that first time, for supporting my decision to move there, For not thinking I was crazy when I said I wanted to live in my dead father's house. You're not crazy, William replied. You're healing. And I want to be part of that healing wherever it takes us. The next morning, as they loaded their belongings into the moving truck, Kate thought about the photograph Mr. Chen had given her, the image of herself as a child, laughing while sitting on her father's shoulders. She had framed that picture and packed it carefully for the move to Oregon, where it would sit on the mantel in David's house, their house now. Kate realized that she was finally ready to create new memories in the space where her father had spent so many years remembering her. She was ready to transform his shrine of regret into a home filled with the life and love he had always hoped she would find, and most importantly, she was ready to forgive him, not because his abandonment hadn't caused lasting pain, but because she finally understood that forgiveness was something she could give herself as much as something she could give to his memory. The moving truck pulled away from their old apartment building just as the morning sun broke through the autumn clouds, casting everything in golden light that seemed to promise new beginnings. Kate took William's hand as they walked toward their car, ready to drive toward a future that would be built on the foundation of love her father had left behind. Imperfect and complicated though it was, the evening passed in a blur of phone calls and difficult conversations. William had convinced Kate to call the lawyer, and they spent over an hour on the phone with a man named Robert Chen, who spoke in the careful, measured tones of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing news to strangers. William sat beside Kate on their couch, holding her free hand while she scribbled notes on the back of an old envelope. The details that emerged painted a picture of a man neither of them had expected. Kate's father, David Morrison, had owned a small automotive repair shop in the town of Millfield, Oregon. He had lived quietly, apparently alone, in a modest house on the outskirts of town. According to Mr. Chen, David had been well regarded in the community, known for his honest work and fair prices. He had died suddenly of a heart attack while working late in his shop one evening. What surprised Kate most was learning that her father had kept track of her over the years. Mr. Chen mentioned finding newspaper clippings about her college graduation tucked away in David's desk, along with a Christmas card she had sent him 8 years ago that he had apparently never thrown away. The knowledge that her father had been thinking about her, even from a distance, seemed to complicate her feelings even further. After the phone call ended, Kate and William sat in silence for a long time. The information they had received required processing, and both of them struggled to understand what it all meant. The house was worth approximately $80,000 according to the lawyer's estimate. The repair shop had some value as well, though it would need to be sold as a business or liquidated. There were also modest savings accounts and a life insurance policy that named Kate as the sole beneficiary. For two people who had been living paycheck to paycheck, scraping together money for rent and groceries, the numbers felt almost abstract. William made $12 an hour at the electronics store, and Kate earned slightly less at the library. They had been together for 3 years, and had never been able to save more than a few $100s at a time. The idea of suddenly inheriting what amounted to more money than they had ever seen was both thrilling and terrifying. "I don't know if I can do this," Kate said finally, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "I don't know if I can go out there and deal with his things, his life, all the pieces he left behind." William understood her hesitation. The practical aspects of inheritance were challenging enough, but Kate was also facing the emotional complexity of confronting a relationship that had been defined by absence and abandonment. Going to Oregon would mean stepping into her father's world, seeing how he had lived without her, and possibly finding answers to questions she wasn't sure she wanted to ask. "You don't have to do anything right now," William said. "Mr. Chen said you have time to think about it. The house isn't going anywhere and the legal stuff can wait a few weeks." But even as he said the words, William could see that Kate was already thinking ahead. She had always been someone who faced problems head-on rather than avoiding them, and he suspected she would ultimately decide to go to Oregon, regardless of how difficult it might be. That night, neither of them slept well. William lay awake listening to Kate toss and turn beside him, occasionally hearing her quiet sniffles in the darkness. When he did drift off, his dreams were filled with images of unfamiliar houses and repair shops, conversations with strangers, and the weight of decisions that seemed too big for their simple life. The next morning, Kate called in sick to work at the library. This was unusual for her because she rarely took time off, even when she wasn't feeling well. Instead, she spent the day researching Millfield, Oregon on the computer at the local library where they offered free internet access. She printed out maps, census information, and real estate listings for similar properties in the area. William found her there when he stopped by after finishing his shift at the electronics store. She was surrounded by papers and had filled a small notebook with lists and questions. Her eyes were still red from crying, but there was a determination in her expression that he recognized. Kate had made a decision. "I have to go," she said without looking up from her research. "I can't just sign papers and pretend this never happened. I need to see where he lived, understand who he became after he left us. Maybe then I can figure out what to do with all of this." William had expected this conclusion, but hearing her say it out loud made everything feel more real. "When do you want to go?" he asked. "Next week, if we can manage it. I already talked to Mrs. Patterson at the library, and she said I can take a few days of unpaid leave. I know we can't afford for me to miss work, but I can't afford not to do this either." The financial reality of their situation hadn't changed overnight. Despite the promise of inheritance money that might eventually come their way, they still had rent due in 2 weeks, groceries to buy, and bus fare to consider. A trip to Oregon would require money they didn't have, but William could see that Kate had already worked out the logistics in her mind. "I've been thinking about the money," she continued, her voice taking on the practical tone she used when she was problem-solving. "Even if we just sell everything and take the cash, it would change our whole life. We could get a better apartment, maybe even buy something. You could go back to school like you've always talked about. We could actually have a future that looks different from what we have now." William had dreamed about going back to college to study computer programming, but those dreams had always seemed impossible, given their financial constraints. The idea that Kate's inheritance might make such things possible felt surreal, like winning a lottery they had never entered. But he also understood that the money came with complications. Kate would have to process her relationship with her father, deal with the emotional weight of his death and the years of silence between them. She would have to make peace with accepting help from someone who had hurt her so deeply when she was young. "What if we go together?" William suggested. "I could ask for a few days off too. You shouldn't have to do this alone." Kate looked up from her papers for the first time since he had arrived, and he could see relief in her expression. "You would do that? Take time off work to come with me to deal with my father's mess?" "It's not a mess," William said, sitting down in the chair beside her. "It's your inheritance and you're my family. Of course I'll come with you." The word family seemed to resonate between them in a way it never had before. They had been a couple, partners, people who loved each other and shared a life. But this situation had elevated their relationship to something that felt more permanent, more committed. They were facing this challenge together as a unit, making decisions that would affect both of their futures. Kate reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I love you," she said simply. "I don't know what I would do without you." As they sat there in the quiet library, surrounded by research about a man Kate had never really known, William realized that this inheritance was about more than money or property. It was about Kate finally getting the chance to understand her father, to find closure for the pain he had caused, and to decide what kind of future she wanted to build with the unexpected gift he had left behind. The Greyhound bus pulled into Millfield, Oregon at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, after 18 hours of travel that had taken Kate and William through 5 states and more truck stops than they cared to count. Kate had barely slept during the journey, instead pressing her face against the window and watching the landscape change from the flat plains of their home state to the rolling hills and dense forests of the Pacific. Northwest Millfield turned out to be smaller than either of them had imagined. The bus depot was nothing more than a bench outside a gas station, and the main street stretched for only 6 blocks before giving way to residential neighborhoods and farmland. The mountains in the distance were shrouded in mist, and the air smelled of pine trees and rain. Even though the sun was shining, Robert Chen had arranged to meet them at a small diner called Murphy's, which seemed to be one of only 3 restaurants in the entire town. William spotted him immediately, a middle-aged Asian man in a gray suit, sitting alone at a corner booth with a briefcase beside him and 2 cups of coffee growing cold on the table. Kate hesitated at the entrance to the diner, and William could see her taking deep breaths to steady herself. This was the moment when everything would become real, when she would have to confront the physical evidence of her father's life in a way that phone calls and paperwork couldn't prepare her for. "You're Kate Morrison," Mr. Chen said, standing up as they approached his table. His voice was the same measured tone they remembered from their phone conversations, but his expression was kind. "I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances." The introductions were brief, and soon they were all seated around the small table, while Mr. Chen opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder of documents. But before diving into the legal details, he surprised them both by pulling out a photograph. "Your father asked me to give this to you if anything ever happened to him," he said, sliding the picture across the table to Kate. "He brought it to my office about 2 years ago when he updated his will." Kate picked up the photograph with trembling hands. It was an old snapshot, faded around the edges, showing a much younger version of herself sitting on the shoulders of a man with dark hair and kind eyes. She was probably 6 or 7 years old in the picture, wearing a bright red jacket and laughing at something outside the frame. The man, her father, was smiling too, his hands holding her legs securely as she balanced on his shoulders. "I don't remember this," Kate whispered, staring at the image. "I don't remember him ever being this happy with me." William reached over and gently touched her arm as tears began to form in her eyes. He could see the confusion and pain on her face as she tried to reconcile this evidence of a loving relationship with her memories of abandonment and silence. "He carried a copy of this picture in his wallet," Mr. Chen said quietly. "The people at the repair shop mentioned that he would sometimes show it to customers when they talked about their own children. He was proud of you, Kate. I think he regretted leaving more than you know." The revelation hit Kate like a physical blow, and she had to set the photograph down on the table before her hand started shaking too badly to hold it. William could see her struggling to process this new information, trying to understand how someone who had been absent from her life could have claimed to be proud of her. After giving her a moment to collect herself, Mr. Chen began explaining the practical aspects of the inheritance. The house was located on Maple Street, about 10 minutes from where they were sitting. It was a small 2-bedroom bungalow built in the 1950s, with a large backyard and a detached garage that David had converted into a workshop. The repair shop was downtown, occupying a corner lot with good visibility and steady foot traffic. "The house is in good condition," Mr. Chen explained, spreading out photographs and inspection reports. "Your father was meticulous about maintenance. New roof 3 years ago, updated electrical, solid foundation. The shop is profitable, though it would need someone with mechanical knowledge to continue operating it." Kate studied the photographs of her father's house, trying to imagine him living there alone for all these years. It looked comfortable and well cared for, with flower boxes under the windows and a neat front yard. There was something about the images that suggested loneliness, though she couldn't quite identify what gave her that impression. "What about his belongings?" she asked. "His personal things?" "Everything is still there exactly as he left it. I have the keys and you're free to go through the house whenever you're ready. Take your time deciding what you want to keep and what you'd prefer to donate or dispose of." The thought of going through her father's possessions felt overwhelming to Kate. She would be looking through the private spaces of someone she barely knew, making decisions about items that might have held great meaning for him, but would be mysteries to her. William sensed her anxiety and spoke up. "Is there somewhere we can stay while we're in town?" "We didn't make hotel reservations because we weren't sure how long this would take." Mr. Chen nodded toward the window, where they could see a modest building across the street with a sign that read, "Millfield Inn." "It's not fancy, but it's clean and affordable. Mrs. Brennan, who runs it, knew your father. She might be able to tell you some things about how he lived here." After finishing their business with the lawyer and getting the keys to both properties, Kate and William checked into the inn. Their room was small but comfortable, with a view of the main street and the mountains beyond. Kate sat on the edge of the bed holding the photograph Mr. Chen had given her, while William unpacked their few belongings. "I don't know if I'm ready to see his house," Kate admitted. "What if I go there and find out things I don't want to know? What if it makes everything worse?" William sat down beside her and took her hand. "What if it makes things better? What if you find out that he really did love you, even if he didn't know how to show it?" Kate leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "I spent so many years being angry at him. If I find out that he cared about me, that he regretted leaving, then what was all that anger for? What was the point of all those years of hurt? Maybe the point was protecting yourself, William suggested. Maybe you needed that anger to get through losing him when you were young. But now you're older, stronger. Maybe now you can handle learning the truth, whatever it is. As the sun began to set over the small town, casting long shadows across their room, Kate made a decision. Tomorrow she would visit her father's house. She would walk through the rooms where he had lived without her, look at the objects he had surrounded himself with, and try to understand who David Morrison had become in the years since he had walked out of her life. The prospect was terrifying, but it was also necessary. Kate realized that she couldn't move forward with the inheritance, couldn't decide what to do with the money and property, until she had faced the man who had left them to her. She needed to know whether she was accepting a gift from someone who had loved her from a distance, or simply inheriting the possessions of a stranger who happened to share her DNA.